Right, folks. Well, I am going to go ahead and get us started. Thank you for joining us on a beautiful summer/fall afternoon. I am Dave Wortman, and I am the statewide sustainability officer in the Department of Administrative Services, for those of you who I have not met. I also have with me here Steve Markham, who is our sustainability analyst in the Office of Sustainability. He's going to be muting people if we need to, if there's extra noise, letting people in the room. He will also be monitoring the chat in terms of questions. So if you do have questions along the way and want to put them in the chat, Steve will be tracking those. We've got about an hour here. We'll keep everybody on time here, keep ourselves on time. And really what we wanted to do today is present two case studies and some discussion around going paperless in our agencies. And in terms of our agenda today, we have about just 10 minutes of myself talking about sort of where this idea came from and what are some of the considerations around going paperless. And then we've got some great presenters here. We're very appreciative of taking their time to share with us their experience and some of their successes. So Jennifer, am I pronouncing your last name correctly? Is it Biddle or Bittel?
Biddle.
Biddle. Okay, I was right
yes,
first time.
Perfect.
Thank you. Thank you. Jennifer Biddle and Brenda Brown from OHA DHS will be talking about their efforts, and then Kayla Van Hoos from ODOT will be talking about their efforts, each for about 15 minutes. And then we're going to have about 20 minutes for just some general discussion. Adam Helvey, our DAS Sustainable Procurement Program Manager, is going to be facilitating that. So you'll get to ask some questions of our presenters, as well as talk about how some of these lessons learned might apply to your agencies as well. And before I start diving into these things too, just a couple other things. We are recording this, so if you're trying to take notes or anything or want to share this with other folks, we will have a recording that you can share. And then in terms of the questions, again, if you can type them in the chat. If there are some burning questions for OHA DHS after they present, Steve will be monitoring those, and there'll be a chance to ask a question or two, but I'm hoping that we can save most of our questions till after both presenters go, and then we'll have plenty of time. So just to get us sort of oriented, paper use, something that we've all been very familiar with, obviously in our roles in our agencies. Going into the office before COVID, just, I think about my own paper use, and it was fairly routine for me to print out things to read every once in a while, or print out an important email or stick something in a file. I have to say that in the couple of years that I've been working mainly remotely, I have probably printed out 1 or 2 sheets of paper myself. I've gone really paperless sort of by necessity, but I also realized that I really haven't lost anything by doing that. So it's been, for me at least, kind of a big mental shift and kind of operational shift in how I do things. And so I know that has been the experience in other agencies as well. Paper use in the US, so before COVID, the average office worker used about 10,000 sheets of paper every year. Over 40% of our wood pulp goes toward the production of paper in this country. And printing and writing paper is about 1/2 of our US paper production. And this is a statistic from before COVID, but the federal government, I believe this was in 2017, spent upwards of $1.3 billion on paper. So it's an essential part of what we do. Going paperless has been a real significant change in how we do things over the last few years. Paper use itself. So paper and pulp production is a pretty energy intensive industry. So it's one of the largest energy consuming industries in the US. It also can be water intensive. It takes about 47 gallons of water to produce 1 ream of office paper. There are air quality and water quality impacts from paper mills and paper production. And then if we look at things like greenhouse gas emissions, obviously harvesting the trees, the transport of that, and then the processing into paper, and then the use and the disposal of it in landfills or hopefully getting recycled, there are greenhouse gas emissions associated with all of that. And I can share these slides, but there's a really interesting paper calculator put together by a coalition of about 150 groups called the Environmental Paper Network. And you can use this calculator and put in the amount of paper, how much of it was recycled content, and it will generate for you some outputs in terms of some of these metrics around energy, water, greenhouse gas emissions, and so on. So some of the benefits of going paperless. I know I've seen some folks in their office cubicles, their workspaces looking like this. Obviously, reducing the amount of paper and ink and power used is reducing the amount of resources we're using and the dollars associated with those things. It helps reduce the cost of producing and mailing paper documents, reducing time around printing, filing, and searching for documents. Much easier to access those things in the cloud. Reducing physical storage space needs and making it easier to share files, particularly when employees are working remotely. When I was a consultant, I would remember we would have to submit proposals for potential work, and we were asked to print out 12 copies, and that would cost us several $100s, have them collated and bound and then shipped off. And it was very time intensive and resource intensive and cost intensive. And certainly that has been the case in our agencies too, as we conduct our operations. But I also wanted to say, not to completely vilify paper, because paper is still our friend. We do use it, and it is a very helpful part of our business. Paperless isn't the right thing for every operation or agency need. Certainly, if you go out to our state printing and distribution facility, they are busy printing legislation, agency letterhead, business cards, and those sort of things that are probably going to stick around. And we also have to remember that paperless operations also have a footprint on the environment. So even as we save more and more things digitally, there is an energy and carbon use for that digital storage, about 3 to 7.5 kilowatt hours of electricity per gigabyte stored in the cloud. And trees are a renewable resource and part of our economy here. And also when we're looking at recycling rates, the paper recycling rate in 2020 was actually pretty good. And a lot of paper mills use at least some recycled fiber to make paper products. So we're not talking about trying to, completely make paper a villain, but realizing that paperless in a lot of cases does make sense in terms of when we add up all the things around resource use, people's time, storage space, efficiencies, file sharing, and so on. So with that, I am going to stop talking, and I'm going to let Jennifer and Brenda start sharing some of their experience at OHA around going paperless.
Okay, thank you. So I want to talk just a little bit about how we got to our paperless function. And in about 2015, we were doing some process improvement. And we were starting with some standards that had about 52 different steps. And we were passing paper back and forth 5 and 6 times in that process. And then we thought there had to be an easier way to do it. So in 2015, we decided to run a pilot on doing a paperless process for all of our contracting. So we took one of our smaller teams here at ODHS and OHA and had them test our new standards that we went from 52 down to about 26 steps. And they actually did the process in going through from the beginning to the end without printing any paper. We are today about, I'd say, 98% paperless. We do still allow a proposer to submit a hard copy or email, and then we scan them into our electronic system and then shred. Some of the things that we found and where people were hesitant was in the trust of one another. What happens if the system goes down? What if somebody accidentally deletes my copies? What if they change my contract document? And I will tell you that we have had maybe people move a file into another file, and Jennifer then gets the task of going and finding where it is, but we have not had an issue with missing files. It actually turned out to be better as people are ill or something happens that they can't come to work. Somebody can easily step in and pick up where they left off in the shared files and have access. The challenges too were, how do we now accommodate for part paper and part electronic? So as we touched a file and did an amendment, we moved it into our electronic cabinet so that we could start archiving and not have any more files in our office here. And that has been a big plus because we didn't have the resources to stay up on that at all times. Let's see. So I think, Jennifer, I will turn it over to you.
Sure. So some more specifics about the pilot project and then kind of where we landed and the process we're still using today. So as Brenda said, the pilot group did a great job of really going through our processing steps prior to that date, whittling that down, figuring out how they were going to make things move from person to get signatures, to get to the vendor, the contractor, etc. So we took, after the pilot, we took their findings and their results and took an even closer look at all of the steps. We looked at what truly is required by procurement rule, what is required by our own agency policies, what's required or what has been required due to audit findings and audit needs in the past. And as Brenda also said, we looked again at the number of times, say a contractor in action was going between a support staff and a writer or to the contractor for signature, and looked at all of that as a whole, whittled those steps down even further, and came up with a much more streamlined process where we had fewer handoffs between people and then a fully electronic process from start to finish where we were not having to print anything. We also, as part of that, we looked at e-signatures, and we're still doing that today. Some of the documents we have allowed that aren't a legal document, we've allowed people to just send that approval via email, and we keep that attached to the action. Other documents, we have the Adobe signatures DocuSign, so we were able to implement some of those into the process steps as well. To support all of that, we completely changed how we presented what we call our standards with all of the steps. We had some desk manuals, some things written down, green checklists on hard copy paper prior to all of this. We moved all of that online to our own internal intranet. And one of the key things that really helped during this time was the ability within our own office to be able to manage those steps on the intranet. If we found something that needed to be changed or adjusted, we could just do it within our own office. We didn't have to send that off to another communications office to make that change on our behalf. So that was a key piece to making this successful. But we put every single step on an intranet page. We listed clearly who was responsible for the step. We used our contract templates. We linked directly to those. We made email templates that could be used in Outlook so that we had a consistent message going out for contracts when they went out for signature, for contracts when they went to our program staff for review. All of those steps, we had a linked template that staff could use so they weren't having to hunt and peck or try to find something that they had used in the past. If there was a policy or another procedure that supported a particular step, we linked directly to that policy or procedure. So you didn't have to go out searching on different sites to find everything. Everything was just in those online steps. So that helped a great deal. Another piece that we implemented was a file structure and a naming convention. so that when we did save all of our documents and emails and approvals into our internal storage file system, whatever you call it, that we could find things. We knew exactly what was a draft document, what was an executed document, what was a DOJ approval email, etc. So that anyone coming in, if they were having to cover for a writer while they were out, or if they were coming in brand new and covering for someone who had maybe retired, things looked similar. They could find documents. It also made it a lot easier for audits to direct auditors where to find documents, and they knew where to look. Or when we're doing public records requests, we know which documents are the final documents that should be sent out for those as well. For communication during this time, we had, of course, communication weekly in huddles and in team meetings within our own office. We also communicated out to our program staff some of our changes because they were impacted when they would get these email templates, just so they knew what to expect and how we process stuff internally. We had newsletters that went out to them. We also have team meetings monthly, sometimes quarterly, with different teams, and we were able to explain to our program staff at that time of kind of what we were doing in contracts and procurement and how it would affect them or what they could expect to see from us. Our plan is to continue. Obviously, we've been doing this since 2015, 2016. We're continuing it to this day. Right now, we are actively in the process of how are we going to fit organ buys into this. And a lot of our document storage is moving from our shared files into organ buys, and using some of the approval paths and the other features that organ buys offers to further improve it and hopefully cut down on even more steps.
Okay, thank you, Jennifer. So some of the things I want to go back to is we also have reporting capabilities that we didn't have before, now that we are tracking electronically. We can even send out an error report to all of the contract specialists here if there's missing information or something didn't get completed. So it really has improved our tracking and our information so that we really do have almost full lifetime tracking of all of our contracts.
And we're doing the same in organ buys now.
Yes,
creating
we are.
our own ad hoc reports to
be able
make sure
track.
we stay up on the data collection and make sure everything's complete.
Yes. So in talking about reduction of paper and our footprint, we were able to return 2 copiers that we no longer use. In fact, we have just 1 small copier in our office. That was a reduction in the paper and the toner costs for our agency here. The reduction in just processing steps was something that I think was great for everyone. It really did cut the time on processing. Instead of every time we handed it off, adding another day. There was a 2-day turnaround is probably the maximum amount of turnover time for processing requests. The data is really important, and when we are onboarding staff, I will tell you, I have had so many folks that come to our agency and all they talk about in the first few weeks is how nice it is to have standards, that everybody is using the same naming conventions, and it makes it so easy to train somebody in the contracting process because there are those standards and policies. We have really had positive results from our program areas that have to interact with us. And most of them happened after COVID started because we had a process already in place that we could easily adapt to some type of electronic signature or signature by email. And so we were already prepared when that happened to be able to easily start this process throughout our whole program. The practice agency-wide, I know more people have come to us asking how we set it up, how did we do the signatures, and how that looked. We are going to be doing things a little differently with Oregon Buys as we learn that process. But again, we look forward to getting to hopefully about 99% electronic use and being able to track and receive our bids and proposals in Oregon Buys. So we do plan on improving the process and being able to get everybody used to doing the electronic. Contractors sometimes have difficulty with change. That's one area that we will have to work on to get help for them to be able to put their proposals and bids online. And I think that's pretty much our process, Jennifer.
Yeah, I think you got it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks to you both. And I probably should have clarified at the beginning in introducing you folks that you are both in procurement. So
Yes.
So this is really really great stuff. And you know, obviously there are a lot of steps, and procurement is very complicated. And kudos to you for making this a success. If there aren't any burning questions, I will let Kayla go from ODOT. So it doesn't, Steve, do we have anything? I'm not seeing anything.
No, we're clear.
Okay, great.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks to you both. Can you stick around after the ODOT one so that we can have a group discussion?
Yes,
yes.
We're going to watch to see what we need to steal from Kayla.
Perfect. Okay.
Thank you.
So Kayla, go right ahead, and yeah, if you could introduce yourself and talk about what you do at ODOT and kind of where this pertains. Looks like you've got it all together in a slideshow. So I'll let you take it away.
Right. Good afternoon. I'm Kayla Van Hoos, and I'm with the ODOT Procurement Office. I do a lot of things with the Procurement Office. I'm an operations and policy analyst, and I'm also the project manager for the ODOT Oregon Buys implementation. But before Oregon Buys started, one of the process improvements that I was tasked with was our electronic file implementation. So back in 2015, very similar to OHA DHS, we started the process improvement to move our paper procurement files to electronic files. We were already in the process of doing a lot of process improvements on improving the process itself and moving things via email. We were receiving the majority of our bids that were non-construction already electronically, whether that was a flash drive or via email for some of our mini solicitations. So we were already really trying to move to that electronic process, but really where we struggled was those procurement files where we had a full printed out procurement file. So when we started the process, we wanted to make sure that we included the folks that were doing the work and printing their work in our work group, in our process improvement work group. So we included folks from the goods and trade services, personal services, and construction to make sure that whatever the file procedure that we had come up with would work for all teams. Trying to be consistent in what we were doing throughout the different areas, knowing though there are some areas that would be a little bit different. So part of that, what we did really focused on the people side of change. So when we started the work, we really made sure that we used the ADCAR change management model when we did this. So we made sure that everyone had the awareness of the need to change, the desire to change, and to participate in supporting the change. Also the knowledge of how to change, so providing all of the training materials that we would need, the desk procedures, the ability that they were able to implement the change, and then reinforcing the change. So those are really how we made sure that when we did go to the electronic files that we had participation all around. So once we did our work groups, we came up again with a electronic file management procedure, which I'm going to show you here in a moment of what that actually looked like. We met consistently with that work group for several months. It probably took us at least 4 or 5 months to get through just coming up with the naming conventions that would work for everybody. Once we did complete the electronic file desk procedure, what we did is we provided the staff the opportunity for 30 days to use the procedure without it being required yet, and then provide us feedback. So they had the option for 30 days to either print their files, do their files the way they do them, or they could start using the electronic file and give us some feedback on that. On January 1st, 2016, the desk procedure became a requirement for all staff to follow. And at that point, everything we were doing was put into an electronic file. 3 months after the implementation, we did a reevaluation of the desk procedure and we got feedback from staff. And if we needed to make any changes, we did that. And then every year we have a review of the desk procedure to make sure that it's up to date and that we are, again, making any changes that we need to based on changing processes or procedures or things that are happening that we needed to modify. So the desk procedure itself, I'm going to go ahead and pull that over and share that with you, is a long desk procedure, but we incorporated the desk procedure for all different areas of the procurement shop and disciplines. I'm going to make that a little smaller. And I'd be more than happy to share this information if anyone would like it or have additional information. I have this for you. So the way we did all of our desk procedures are all set up where we have the purpose, the application, and the policy around how they're used. And then they're broken down by responsibility and action. So essentially what we've done is we've created a sample template folder for everybody who's doing procurement to use the exact same file structure that's already set up for them with the files. So they don't have to create any new files. They just grab a copy of the template and then they start doing the files with the template. We do, and later in the procedure it does show, we do refresh those files because lots of times someone will accidentally delete one of the subfolders or whatnot. So we'll refresh them occasionally or when we notice that there's a need to. So in this desk procedure, really we go through the naming convention of how all of the folders should be named when you are doing a contract, whether you're doing your price agreements, your contracts, your bids. Now, this electronic file management procedure is for procurement, but really in reality, any type of work that you do, you could create some type of file management system to be consistent with the different types of work you're doing. So if you have different projects, you could follow something very similar to this. So we've got the responsibilities. We also have some screenshots of how they copy and paste their folder and where they put their folders. So it's very clear for them on when they're doing their filing. And that they need to keep all their subfolders regardless. So that way we know if there's nothing in the subfolder that there was nothing to be there, but it does not get deleted. Again, we just have some more of the actions that they need to take. Their procurement checklist. So all of their checklists became electronic. So within an Adobe PDF, so they would go through their procurement checklist, they'd save their checklists. And then it just go to a little bit more of the template folder maintenance like I just talked about. And then we get into some more, and this is where we break down the different types of folders and different types of filing. So for this one, this is for our personal services and goods and trade services. We were able to create something that was consistent between the two types of procurement, and they are able to use the same naming conventions. We give some samples here of emails, if they're doing emails, their proposals and their evaluation packets, just to get them familiar with what that should look like. And then we get down to the meat of what it really looks like. So we actually gave them, they have this document to follow for their naming conventions. We know this is not have every single document, but we really tried to get as many as we could on here so that when they came to this, they had a great idea of where they needed to file it. And then as we found things missing, we would add them for folks. That was really important, that as much as we could have in here so that they didn't feel like they had to guess at where something would go. So we have our folders, the type of documents that would go into the folders, the naming convention on how they would name their documents. If we would like them to add subfolders, then they could do that. Again, it just goes through all the different document types. And then we go into amendments. So if they're doing an amendment, they copy the amendment folder into their procurement file, and they would follow all of the types of things they would do in their amendment, whether it was the cost, the DOJ. We wanted to make sure we had a place where confidential information could go. Again, they're drafting documents versus their executed documents. This was huge for us when we were able to find things, just like Jennifer and Brenda had said. Finding things in the file was really important. When we didn't have a structure and people were still putting things in electronic files, they were all across the board on how they were named, finding things. Maybe it was in the paper file and there was some in the electronic file. So this really streamlined and made sure you could find everything you needed very easily. And then we get down into if you're doing contracts and purchase orders or walks. And again, same type of thing, but again, very, very clear on what they needed to be attaching. And then we got into the construction. So our construction side of the house is a little different than our personal services and our goods and trade services. They were printing extremely large contracts, like thick pieces, binders worth of contracts. So this was a big shift for them to move into this electronic filing and paper files. So they again had their types of naming convention and what theirs would look like for construction. Again, it's pretty different than the rest of the procurement office. Scroll down, probably making you a little dizzy. We would go into our closeout. So we do have a file guideline for contract closeout as well. We did create a quick reference guide for each of the different types that really lined out some of those basic. So if you just needed to look really quick, maybe as a refresher, we had that as well. And that comes in handy for folks once they start learning how to do the filing. Just like Brenda and Jennifer had said, we are still now working on how Oregon Buys works with our electronic files, because a lot of things are in Oregon Buys. And so how does this electronic file work together with our Oregon Buys file to create your complete procurement file? And that we're not duplicating things. That's one thing we've tried really hard not to do. If we've got it in Oregon Buys, do we need it in our electronic file? If the Oregon Buys documents and our electronic file is our complete procurement file. So we know we will never get to everything in Oregon Buys because we have our DOJ confidential information that we wouldn't be putting in there or other things. But again, we're going to try and look at that streamlined process of what will go in Oregon Buys and then what will stay in our electronic files. All right, any questions?
Thank you, Kayla. That was great. You folks are super organized. I'm really impressed, and you've done a great job. And I'll just say that obviously a lot of this is in details and logistics and that sort of thing. But at the end of the day, we're making things way more efficient in terms of, again, our use of resources and our people power and all sorts of things like that. So yeah, hats off to ODOT for all the hard work that you put into that. So I'm going to turn it over to Adam here. Adam's going to facilitate. I have questions, I know. So don't be shy. You must have a lot of questions for both of our agency presenters, and Adam will call on you if you don't start asking questions. And so this is meant to be ask questions. Let's have discussions. How can this apply to your agency? And how can we learn from each other? So Adam, take it away.
Yeah, we'll start. Does anybody out there have any questions they want to do? You want me to get you warmed up? I've got about 4 that lined up that I can ask. But wait for just a second and see. Well, let's start with a couple that I kind of noticed. Maybe we can alternate between Jennifer and Kayla, but I'm curious to know like what staff are saying about it kind of after the fact. So I can't remember the exact date or time frame, but now that's been in place for a while. You know, what's the kind of general feel? Are you still getting any pushback, or are people kind of making suggestions to improve, all that kind of stuff? What do you think?
For ODOT, definitely when we went all electronic, that was hard. All the same things that Brenda and Jennifer had said about folks being concerned about things being deleted, all of those same concerns. Now it's just second nature to them. It was a very different environment back in 2015 than it is right now. So it may be even an easier move for folks to go electronically and put some of these processes in place just because of where we're at today. But it was a hard thing for our folks back then, having that paper in their hand, knowing that they had it safe. But now I think they're all just so used to it that I think they would have a really hard time going back if they were asked to go back to paper.
Yeah, and I know in procurement, you know, when we do, especially the NASPO agreements, we'll have like some of these proposals be boxes and boxes of paper. So I think some people are absolutely relieved, and then others are, you know, still fighting it. But yeah.
So,
What about you, Jennifer?
yeah, oh, sorry. I think we had some of the similar experiences. However, now people don't want to go back. I had people that have been doing this for over 20 years, and giving up the paper was a very scary thing, and they kept their paper for a while in addition to the electronic. But now, because of the tools we can give them, the consistencies that we can give them in naming conventions, and we give them what we call a pending report that comes to them that's updated every day, that tells them exactly what's on their plate, what the last status note was in there, and they're not having to track on a whiteboard or on another spreadsheet. So they have information at their hand every morning when they come in, and those are tools now that they wouldn't give up. So it is a help.
That's great. That's great.
And to your,
This is Steve Markham here. One thing that I keep hearing and I think is key to this program working is a consistent naming convention for files. I just came into the state in 2018, and that was one of the things that drove me nuts in general is everything was named differently. And so I think if you're going to go paperless, you find a way to name files consistently is a really great way to go with it. I think that helps everybody else out too.
Yes. And Adam, you also mentioned feedback. To this day, we still get feedback from staff, and we make improvements when a little bit at a time when things change, or we come up with an even better way of doing things. So even this many years later, we're still improving.
Well, that's amazing because, you know, thinking about a lot of program work, even where, you know, Oregon buys or any other project, if you're not getting feedback, that it's almost concerning, because then you're worried about people not really buying in. So the fact that they're giving feedback is a big deal, and you're probably getting feedback on things that were normal processes a long time ago that people stopped caring about giving feedback because it's just kind of the way it was. So it almost gives you a new lens to look at your work and kind of try things differently. So that's awesome. You know, being that you guys are in procurement and I'm in procurement, I'm just kind of curious, did you guys have to go to DOJ to talk about any of this, or, you know, get any higher level approvals that maybe you weren't planning on, anything like that, anything around that?
So I do see, and I know Kirk is online. He is our designated procurement officer. And I believe he reached out not only to DOJ, but to Treasury to see what policies or procedures there were for electronic signatures. And so there was some of that we had to do up front before we jumped out to make sure that we were going to still have a legally binding agreement when we went to electronics. And everything that we found supported us going to electronic signatures.
Oh, great. Okay, and you know, that'd probably be a suggestion from me as well. Whenever you're doing this kind of stuff, you probably want to start there just to see if there are any huge roadblocks right in the beginning. And I think, you know, we got a good idea of when the project's kicked off and all that kind of stuff. But I'm wondering who kind of started, where did the idea come from? Like who spearheaded that and where was the desire? Where did that ultimately come from?
I remember just saying there's way too many steps. There's just I think in our office, it was a joint office. I mean, we had the impetus just to go paperless, to go electronic, not to have everything hard copy for sure. But people were overall fairly on board with just cutting down the number of processing steps. Contract writing is complicated enough with all the requirements and everything, and then to add a huge administrative process on top of it just added to the chaos. So we just wanted to try to simplify. Going electronic was the way to go at the time, and so it all just kind of fit together.
And I can tell you too, and Jennifer usually gets the brunt of my ideas, but one of the things I kept challenging her was, how can we reduce our footprint of these paper files? We ran out of room to put any more file cabinets along a wall or anywhere else to be putting them. And it was like, how do we reduce this and do away with those cabinets? Now, I would like to tell you after all these years, the cabinets are gone, because that was one of my goals, but they're still here because of archiving.
But there's fewer files in them.
There are. So that also prompted some of looking at this differently, just to reduce that footprint.
Awesome.
I've got a hand raised. Adam?
Oh, yeah. Chris Stenson, go ahead.
Yeah, hello everyone. So just wanted to key in on a couple things here. So I'm trying to put my hand down and talk at the same time. It doesn't work. Right. So I'm Chris Stenson. I'm the state records manager at the State Archives. And so I just wanted to put in a little plug. I appreciate the work that those folks have been doing, and I'll admit I chimed in just to make sure that nobody was going astray on this. You guys are doing great work. I would like to just put out keynotes on a couple things, right? So in both these cases, we're talking about financial documents, procurement, contract processes, which are pretty well documented and have a fairly limited range of variables in terms of retention requirements and other parameters that may come into play. For those of you who may work in other types of business units, please do consult with your agency records officer and or my office here at the State Archives prior to embarking on these, just to make sure that you're covered in all the existing administrative rules for the types of materials you want to go electronic with and that sort of thing. We want to make sure that you plan for that at the beginning, and not find yourself stuck later on when you realize, oops, we're not actually allowed to do that thing. And the second part, which folks have really hit the naming convention part, and that's absolutely crucial. The other part is knowing where these things are going to go, and don't just trade an overstuffed file cabinet for an overstuffed file share, right? So ideally, we like to have a home that makes sense. Ideally, some sort of system that's going to track and manage these things over time and organized in a way that you can actually get rid of them when you need to, right? We don't want to just jumble these things up. So check your retention schedule. Again, I don't want to put a wet blanket on that. I think this is great. I just want to make sure that folks know, please do talk to us as well. We're here to help on that front to make sure that you have all those things figured out before you go.
We do. Thank you, Chris. We do have a tracking database with an archiving piece to it. So we utilize the retention schedule and we can run reports from that to know when we can archive documents, how long they need to be archived for, whether they be 6 years or 10 years, and we apply that to both our electronic and our what's remaining of our paper files. So thank you.
This is Kayla. Sorry, I dropped off for a moment, but yes, we have the same thing. We actually have an archiving desk procedure that we put together right after this that we've had been working on to do the exact same thing.
All right, perfect. Thanks so much, Chris. I guess the only other thing that I can think of as a question, and still looking in here to make sure there's no other questions live, is kind of what advice you might give to some other agencies or divisions that are considering this. If there's anything like just clearly obvious that you think you would have them consider before embarking on the journey.
And so if I can just piggyback on what Kayla said earlier, it is important to have somebody from each of the teams participate on this venture. You seem to get better buy-off when they are included in making those decisions, and then having one of the units test the process before it goes live, and to also have that constant feedback or that door that is open to take that for improvements or things that maybe we didn't catch at first, and that it is a living document, and I think it will continue to change.
Yep, I agree.
It
And
looks-
just making sure you've got that people side of the change, that they've got that buy-in, so that you've done the work to make sure that everyone's aware and get that buy-in from folks.
It looks like we have a multiple part question from Jeff McGowan here.
Yeah. So yeah, we have, how well is your naming convention working for electronic searches? And did you look at any particular document management system?
We did, I don't think we did at the time. I don't think it was an option financially or practically. We just tried to do a naming. We already had a numbering system that came out of our internal contract tracking system. So we had a either 4 or 6 digit number that we could work from. And then we just tagged on additional naming to that of what made logical sense and what was clear. Again, as we worked with the team, kind of came to consensus on, if I'm looking for something, what would I expect to see? And then we developed from there.
And I would say the same thing for ODOT. We have a file management system, FileNet, that ODOT uses. We did look at some of that, but it didn't really make sense to spend as much effort as would needed to do what we wanted to do in the filing for us. So we stuck with our network drive and folder naming, and then searching by that contract number, and then being able to just know what was in each of those folders. There's not necessarily, I would say, I don't think people will search for a keyword. They're going to search for the contract number and then go within that file and know where to find something within the file.
Yeah,
Okay.
Same here. We search by the number most often.
Great. How about, did either of you consider the use of Outlook PST files for storage emails related to a particular project or contract instead of saving and renaming emails individually?
I don't think I know what that is, so no.
Yeah, I was asking, I didn't know, so. So maybe if there's a blurb you can send out, Jeff, or, point us in the right direction so we could know, or you could unmute and speak a little bit to that.
Sure, yes. So within Outlook, you could create a PST folder in which you could basically, instead of in your inbox, you can move emails, either copies or just move them straight into another folder. And then you just, you could, it's tied to your Outlook basically, but then you could unattach it, or you could store it somewhere else, and then somebody could attach that PST folder to their Outlook, right? And then from there, they basically have the same thing. It looks like it's in their inbox from there. It's just folders within their mailbox as a PST folder. Now, my understanding is DAS does not like PST folders, but I used to use them in the private sector where I was doing some project management, and I could, at the end of the project, just dump a copy of my latest PST folder into the project folder, and then anybody else could go search for emails in there if they had to.
Yeah, we have
So,
And then it gives you the searchability with an Outlook too, to search for emails instead of, because a lot of times you get 20 different emails with a subject line, reply. They all look the same, except it's got as a number at the end.
yeah, and we had done that before we got Outlook. And then what we found out is when we went to Outlook, we lost all of those files in the old email system. And so we've been trying to do PDF or some other save as, so that we don't ever lose them and they're a permanent record in our files. And so there's pros and cons, I think, either way.
Yeah, it depends on Outlook. As long as Outlook, if we continue using Outlook and it stays relevant file, kind of like PDF, but my
Right.
understanding is some PDFs have to be a particular type of PDF to make sure they stay good into, decades from now.
Yes.
Jeff, did
looks
you want
like-
to? Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, it looks like Chris posted some other things in the chat for everyone around scanning resolution and some other things around PSD files. So just FYI.
Okay, awesome. And Jeff, do you want to ask your last question in there since we got you up and not muted?
Okay, yes. Well, didn't Dave just read it or no? Does your guidance include settings for scanning documents, drawings for clarity or searchability while also keeping file sizes, as small as we can? So we're actually going through a process now of digitizing our drawings and stuff like that. So
Ours does not, but we deal almost exclusively in text, so it's not real fancy.
we've got a lot of older facilities in our portfolio, and so a lot that back in, buildings built back in the 60s or 50s or whatnot that we didn't get CD-ROMs or anything like that with contract information at the time like we do now, either through Dropbox or
That makes sense.
media.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think we can probably hand it back to Dave, do some closing at this point. Thanks for all the questions. And Dave, you want to?
Yeah. So I guess, in doing research on this topic, there's a lot of anecdotal evidence around sort of efficiencies and resource conservation savings and that sort of thing. But I think what we would love to be able to do, and maybe, working with ODOT and OHA DHS, is trying to quantify some of this as much as we can. So, for example, I know that DAS procurement, we have access to historical records on agency paper use and paper purchases. So potentially looking at, what that looked like before COVID, and then what it looked like during our COVID kind of work from home posture, and seeing, what that looks like in terms of the paper use and printing and that sort of thing. I think would be really interesting. I think it'd be probably a little more challenging to quantify, the actual hours saved of labor and that sort of thing. But, if you folks are willing to participate in any sort of follow-up on your case studies, I think that would be a great thing to look at. And then for those folks who are here from other agencies, please share this. We will share this recording with everybody, but we'd love to have you share these case studies within your agencies and divisions. And, again, I think this is a way we can find multiple wins. I always love those kind of things in sustainability, when we're seeing that we can save resources, improve efficiencies, help make people's work lives maybe a little easier. And so, those are all the comments I have, really. So keep up the great work. And I guess one last chance. We've got just a few minutes. Does anybody have any other final follow-up questions? Chris, is there anything from Secretary of State you want to leave us with your comments in the chat?
I was just responding to specific ones. If you do have questions about specific standards or requirements, either we have created them ourselves at the State Archives, or we can point to industry best practices that would be recommended. So if you're looking at unusual types of objects, right? Like I mentioned earlier, when you have a fairly homogeneous work stream and they're all of a type, it's relatively straightforward. More complicated processes like engineering drawings, blueprints, those are often the sticky ones just because they don't lend themselves to easy conversion. So always happy to consult and talk to you, and please don't be shy about reaching out to us. You can reach out to me directly, or records.management@sos.org and .gov. I'll throw it in the chat, and you can always ping us with questions to that effect.
Great. Thank you, Chris. Yeah, and likewise, we may not have all the answers at DAS Sustainability, but we certainly are here to support you in your efforts. And if there's anything we can do in terms of providing resources, I mentioned that paper impact calculator that's in the slides. I would encourage you to play around with that if that's something you want to use to help inform your decision making. But again, you can reach out to myself or Steve Markham, and either one of us would be happy to help you out. So I think that's it. So thanks again for coming. Appreciate it. And keep doing great work. Take care, everybody.
Thank you.